So I mean, you could be a multimillionaire and have many different accounts. It's up to $250,000 that is protected and insured. So if the bank goes bankrupt, you get your money back. So if the government's going to do that, then I think it should also take away Glass-Steagall, because or should reassert a Glass-Steagall-like legislation, because what Glass-Steagall did, what taking it away did, was allow the Goldman Sachs of this world to become commercial banks so they could get the insurance and then engage in the same sort of high-risk games, investment banking games that brought them huge profits. So they enter this highly risky environment, unlike the commercial banks that just basically took in deposits and made loans to people. These guys are getting involved, as you point out, in derivatives and all kinds of crazy things that are high risk, bring them enormous returns and huge bonuses at the end of the year. And then when the system goes down, they just say, oh, well, you know, we need the government to bail us out, because if we don't, all you people are going to be worse off. That's what they want us to believe, that all the bailouts that have been brought about are for our good, the common person's good. I think that's a lot of baloney. In the short run, sure, there would have been some pain for everybody if we had gone down and left after Lehman Brothers allowed the whole system to cleanse. But it would have been good for the masses of Americans longer term if that had happened. But given the fact that if we're not willing to go back to a free market economics, as long as the government is going to try to insure deposits, then I think a reassertion of Glass-Steagall would be a good thing.
You have about 200,000 listeners per month on your Turning Hard Times into Good Times show. You've had a number of guests such as Jim Marsh, John Coleman, Daniel Estulin, Ed Griffin, that some might label conspiracy theorists. What has been the general response from your audience towards this particular niche of guests?
Well, I think that my audience is probably my audience because they're not fully trusting the establishment, and for good reasons. And so I would think in general my audience has been very receptive to the so-called conspiracy theorists, but I honestly believe that they're labeled conspiracy theorists in order to try to discredit them. Because instead of examining what these so-called conspiracy theorists are saying and then responding to what they're saying, they just simply call them names. If you look at the work of Creature from Jekyll Island, it's a book that's written by Ed Griffin, it's extremely well footnoted. I mean, you can't say that it's not. It's just everything in there is, he's not blowing smoke. He's just going out and finding the truth and reporting it and pulling it together in one book. Who are the powers behind the throne? Who owns the Federal Reserve? Well, follow the money, and then you start to understand why the banks got bailed out and why the average people are being enslaved. And so I think the response has been very positive. I mean, I don't just dwell on that. I have a lot of sort of mainstream people in my show too.
Yes.
Because we do have to deal with what is really here. You know, I mean, I'm looking at the markets now and believing that we have a chance to make some good money this year, possibly. Not because the markets are healthy, but because Bernanke is pumping money into the system, because that money will find its way out into the kind of investments that I invest in. It would be honestly better for all of us and for our country and for our liberty and our freedom if they let the thing go down and we suffered some real pain and got all this dead wood cleared out of the way. But it is what it is. So I have people like A. Gary Schilling on my show, who's a mainstream economist that's on the mainstream media a lot, Stanford educated, PhD. David Stockman, which was Ronald Reagan's budget chief, who got really well-known person, was on my show recently. So, you know, we have a lot of mainstream people that are on the show as well. But the conspiracy theorists, I mean, they can call them whatever they want. Let's look at what they're saying in the books.
Yes.
Let's examine the evidence rather than call them names. I think the same thing would apply to Ron Paul, who's been on my show. Ron Paul is, you know, like the establishment likes to label him a nutcase and a racist. Well, I know Ron personally. Nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, he's a doctor that went out of his way to deliver a baby to a woman who had a black husband in Texas at a time when racism was really,
in the 60s.
and no other doctors would treat that person. So the Democrats and the Republicans who didn't want a Ron Paul because he really would make the changes that we need labeled him a racist.
Yes.
because of something that was written in his
In a
newsletter that
blog.
he didn't even
Yeah.
write.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are the games, and I don't pay any attention to what the establishment wants to call people names. Let's just see what the people are about. Not usually, a lot of times it's sort of the projection. I think is the psychological defense mechanism. And my
Yes.
mother used to say, if you point your finger at your brother, you got 3 of them coming back at you.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of times what's happening is the people that are calling those people conspiracy artists are really the ones that are committing the conspiracy a lot of times.
Very good. A few times on your show, you correlate the debasing of a nation's currency to the disintegration of a nation's morality. Can you elaborate on
Yeah, this is actually the reason that I got involved and interested in hard money and honest money. I had a professor back in 1967 who was convinced there was a correlation between the debasing of a currency and exactly that, the work ethic and morality of a nation. And as a young fellow, I found that pretty interesting. As a young fellow, was brought up with a fairly religious background, moral background. And so it was during the time of Vietnam, and I started watching, and it seemed kind of interesting because it sort of made sense. And so I watched what was going on during Vietnam, and socialism started to creep in more and more. And we had a lot of other, the erosion of sort of morality in terms of the family, sexual morality, and all that sort of thing happened at the same time. And the institutions that were conservative were being torn down in the United States. So I started watching that. But if you think about it, it makes all the sense in the world. If you tell somebody that they can have something for nothing, they like to take you up on that. I mean, I personally would like to take you up on that if you could give me something for nothing. So what we have is Keynesian economics. Get back to Keynes again. Keynes called gold the barbaric relic. We had to get rid of gold. Keynes had to get rid of gold so that government could expand and give these goodies away to people. Alan Greenspan understood it very well when in 1966 he wrote an article, Gold and Economic Freedom, and he said that the reason governments hate gold so much is it stands in the way of theft. It stands in the way of reallocating wealth from the people that create it to the bankers and the ruling class and government. And so what happened when we debased the currency is we allowed the politicians to allocate wealth to their buddies, to their crony capitalist friends. It goes to the crony capitalist and it demoralizes the people that really work hard. And then we came out, there were no credit cards before 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. That's when credit cards became available. That's when you could start to have your party now and never have to save and work for it. You could buy a house, you could buy a car, you could buy a second, third house. You could just do whatever you wanted, when you wanted. You didn't have to wait, you didn't have to work. And I honestly believe that changed the morality and the idea that you didn't have to work for something. You can have it now, you can have your pleasure now, you don't have to work for anything. And I think even beyond the material, it probably has something to do with the way people treat each other. You know, if you really have to work hard for a relationship, it's something different than if you wanted just a one-night stand or something, which is sort of what people like to have, one-night stands, a quick fix to everything, you know, whether it's pleasure or money or whatever. So I think that Dr. Peyton Yoder was his name, a history professor back at a little Mennonite college in 1967, was absolutely right. And I started watching it, and I'm more convinced than ever. And look at all of the immorality on Wall Street in the last number of years. And honestly, you know, they put this guy away, Bernie Madoff, for a Ponzi scheme. But if you really look, the ultimate Ponzi scheme is the one that's being run by the Federal Reserve. I mean, what is it but a Ponzi scheme? They create $2 trillion and pump it into the system, and I mean, it's just nonsense. So I think Peyton Yoder was absolutely right about that. It makes a lot of sense, and I think history is proving him to be right on that.
In Canada, there is a growing environmental movement that is opposed to resource infrastructure and extraction, i.e. the pipelines, Enbridge pipeline, oil sands, tar sands. The belief is that we should sharply reduce resource exploration extraction and switch to alternative energy sources in the interest of sustainability and combating the supposed climate change. As a resource investment analysis, what is your view on these issues and the relationship to the UN's Agenda 21?
Yeah. You know, I think that I'm afraid that the Agenda 21 may be just part of an excuse to gain control. If you can scare everybody in the world into believing that their oxygen is going to be taken away from them and we're all going to die, then you have a reason to take away